So what we have here is your typical Chinese import GY6 scooter engine. I gotta fix something on it, but as long as I'm doing this, I thought I'd make a quick video on how to properly adjust these valves here. Now, as long as it's already open like this, it'll be really easy for you guys to see everything and for me to kind of go over and explain everything. This front part here is the valve cover. Around it, there will be either 5/16 or 8mm. Four bolts on this one. Some of them may have 5, but with the engine cool, so cold that you can actually touch it and nothing's going to happen. You're not going to burn yourself or anything. It's best to do it if it's been sitting overnight or something like that. But we're just going to zip this cover off quick. And on one of these, there will usually be a ground wire. It was on this one, but I have already taken it off. I'm going to fold this over and take this last one out. Now I'm using a power tool to remove them, but you always want to put them in by hand. This is low-grade aluminum and it will strip out really easily. So now that they're all out, we can just pull this straight off. And you can see the valves inside there. Well, I guess it's not quite accurate to say you can see the valves, but you can see the rocker arms and the springs, the keepers, the cam chain, the cam gear, cam shaft, and all the retainers for all that. So with the spark plug in, you'll notice if I turn it, because of the compression in there and the springs and everything else, it sometimes likes to jump back to a different spot. Like if we wanted it right there, we couldn't get it there because it keeps wanting to jump back. In order to solve this problem, we simply remove the spark plug. Now there's nothing in there to really create the compression. Everything is open. You'll notice as I rotate it, there's a small hole and a big hole and another small hole again. As the big hole is up towards the intake, that's where this valve actually gets opened, and if we rotate it farther down, you can see the big hole comes down towards the exhaust, and that's where the exhaust valve opens. Basically, we want the arms to sit in their naturally resting positions, and in order to do that, we need to have both the tiny holes perpendicular on this line here and the big hole straight up here. That's the easiest way to do it without explaining all the timing marks or anything else like that. So I'm going to do 3/1000 of an inch for the intake and 4/1000 of an inch for the exhaust. Now these engines come restricted from the manufacturer to meet the regulations required in order to sell them in the United States. So you can see that this says 0.003. We'll stick it between the rocker arm, between the nut in here, and the valve. And you can see that it slides freely in there. We'll try the next size up, 0.004, and that still slides freely in there. So we know that this is not where we want it. Let's try all the way up to a 0.006 and see if that slides freely in there. And it does. So we know that this is pretty far out of adjustment. So now that we've verified that this valve is actually out of adjustment, the next thing to do would be to loosen this nut here on the outside. In this case it'll be a 9mm, so we'll just break it free a little, turn it out a couple turns so it's just sitting there free. We'll go back to our feeler gauge that we want, select it right there out of the bunch. These are really thin and sometimes hard to find, but we'll put that in there, and then we'll, not without touching the outer nut, we'll rotate this inner screw here until we have tension on this feeler gauge. See, without tension, this thing slides freely, but add tension and you can actually see that it doesn't slide as freely as it used to. Now with this where we want it, we can tighten up the outer nut again. The outer nut is the lock nut, and that's what holds it in place. So what I like to do is I actually like to leave the feeler gauge in there while I tighten it up, so that way it can't close on it any farther, and adjust the size while you're locking it up. So now that I've twisted it a little, locked it up, 3/1000 of an inch still has tension on it. We'll try the 4/1000 of an inch, which is right there. Here's the 4/1000 of an inch, and that will no longer fit. Back down to 3/1000, and we have our tension. You can feel the drag across there, and you can kind of hear it skip along there. So that's exactly where we want it. I'm going to wiggle it and still hear the free play in it. So we're good on that. Next thing we'll do is we'll go down to our exhaust valve, and we'll do pretty much the exact same thing. Put the socket on there, rotate it counterclockwise to bust the locking nut free. Spin it out a few turns, put the correct size in there. There is a 4/1000 of an inch for you. And now that we have our drag on there, we're spinning this inner screw here until we have a nice steady drag on this feeler gauge. Now we're gonna rotate this inner nut here to lock it up, and we're going to snug it down a little bit with the socket. So now that we have this drag, you can actually kind of see it in the oil that's on this feeler gauge here. We'll try with a 5. And if a 5 doesn't fit, then we know we're good. It's hard to read it there, but that's a 5/1000 of an inch. And we're going to attempt to put it in there. And it doesn't fit. So there's the 4/1000 again. Fits perfectly. So we know we're good. Now we have everything adjusted where we need to. Next step is just to take a clean new paper towel and wipe off the head here. It looks like somebody's already been in here. There's a couple marks in here that aren't too pretty. We're going to clean off any dirt or grime or debris, or even the oil that's on there. We're just going to clean everything off of it. Then we're going to come to this valve cover gasket and do the exact same thing on this surface. We want them to mate up nicely and not have anything at all in the way. So now that I've wiped it off and it passes a visual inspection, I can go ahead and very gently just put it straight on there, and we will start these by hand. Well, apparently there's a glare in there, but anyways, what we want to do is actually, just like putting the lug nuts on your car, we want to go in a crisscross pattern and slightly tighten them down gently to begin with. Do not use power tools for this. You will strip it. These don't have to be super duper tight. There's not a whole lot of compression or anything in them, but they do need to be tight enough to compress that seal in there so nothing leaks. Otherwise, if you make them too tight, then you'll strip them out and then you'll have a really bad day. You'll have to retap these threads, which is entirely possible, and you would not be the first one that's had to do that. Don't go torque crazy on them. Just get them snug on there, and then you're done.